Joseph sat behind his desk, the weight of his new position as office manager pressing down on him. He'd never been one for subtlety, and now that he had the power, he intended to use it. With a swift, decisive hand, he slashed salaries across the board. The employees' stunned reactions didn't faze him. If they were upset, they could leave. His own salary remained untouched. Why should he give up any of his own comfort? Within days, resignation letters piled up, stacking neatly in the corner of his office, almost as though they were a testament to his authority. The employees who stayed behind were mostly the desperate ones, the ones who had nowhere else to go. The work piled on. Deadlines, longer hours, nothing slowed Joseph down. If they were overworked, too bad. He had his own agenda, and this branch needed to get back on track. And then there was the janitor's position. The one person who seemed to bear the brunt of his cruelty was Mrs. Bennett, the HR manager. She had been trying to find a replacement for the office's janitor, who had recently quit after years of being underpaid. Mrs. Bennett begged Joseph to increase the pay for the new hire, but he refused. Who would want to clean for such a small wage? She had asked. Joseph snorted. We're successful. The pay doesn't matter. I'll find someone. But as weeks passed and the office grew dirtier, his own words began to ring hollow. The janitor position remained unfilled, and every morning Joseph walked into the office with his complaints about the dust on the windowsills, the lack of cleanliness in the break room, the unemptied trash can. The office had never been more miserable. One morning, during a meeting where Joseph's frustrations boiled over once again, he turned to Mrs. Bennett with a cold sneer. If we don't find a janitor soon, you'll be mopping the floors yourself. Do you understand? He didn't wait for her response before storming out. But that afternoon, while walking by the window, something caught his eye. Outside, in the alley by the dumpsters, a woman was gathering cardboard boxes with surprising precision. She was poor, dressed in tattered clothes, but she moved with a quiet, purposeful grace that intrigued him. He leaned closer to the window, his mind racing. He had an idea. Mrs. Bennett, get the security guard. Now, he barked. A few moments later, the guard was at his side, ushering the woman into the building. Brooke entered the office quietly, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She was deaf, he quickly realized, and her hearing aid, cheap and worn, seemed ineffective. Her clothes, though unkempt, were clean, and she had an aura of determination that Joseph underestimated. I need a janitor, Joseph began, enunciating each word. Are you interested? Brooke nodded, her eyes wary but not unkind. Joseph smirked, believing he had found an easy solution. She'd take the low wage and never complain. You'll clean the office, and don't expect much, just keep it tidy. Brooke nodded again, her expression unreadable. Joseph felt a surge of triumph. His office was about to get cleaner without the hassle of paying a decent wage. Little did he know, the woman standing before him was about to change everything. Brooke's first week on the job was almost seamless. She arrived early, her mop and cleaning supplies in tow, and stayed long after the office emptied. The dust, the trash, the neglected corners of the building all disappeared under her diligent work. The office transformed. Desks gleamed, floors shone, and even the break room, once a messy battlefield of half-eaten lunches and spilled coffee, became spotless. But her hard work went largely unnoticed by most of her co-workers. Instead, she became the target of ridicule and cruelty. Every time someone passed her, they would make exaggerated signs and gestures, mocking her deafness, or whisper behind her back, sure she couldn't hear their taunts. Her co-workers treated her as less than human, a silent figure to be ignored or belittled. Brooke, however, never let it show. She had learned long ago that silence could be her shield. She focused solely on her work, each sweep of the mop, each scrub of the counter a small act of defiance against the world's cruelty. The office was her world, and if she could control the cleanliness of it, she could control something in her life. Her home was another matter. The small apartment she rented was freezing, its single radiator rattling away in an attempt to provide warmth. Brooke didn't mind the cold. She had always found solace in the company of her pets. A hodgepodge of strays she had rescued over the years, her home was filled with the sound of meowing cats and barking dogs. It was messy, yes, but it was hers. Her animals depended on her, and in turn they gave her something no one else could, unconditional love. At night, as she lay in her bed, Brooke would run her fingers over the worn pages of her journal, her mind wandering. There were dreams she had, ambitions beyond cleaning. She had once been a top student, excelling in business courses and economic theories. But life, in its unpredictable way, had veered her down a different path. No matter how much she wished to change it, she had responsibilities now. Her animals needed her, and she couldn't abandon them. Brooke's talents, hidden beneath the grime of janitorial work, began to surface in subtle ways. She found herself eavesdropping on business conversations between co-workers, her sharp intellect grasping at the scattered pieces of corporate jargon. One day, while sorting through some paperwork in the break room, she stumbled upon a business proposal that caught her attention. It was a plan that could save the company from its downturn, one that no one had bothered to read through. As Brooke studied it in her spare moments, a sense of pride began to stir within her. This was her chance. But the office politics were a labyrinth, and even if she could prove herself, would anyone listen to someone like her? She had no official position in the company, and her deafness had already ensured she would be dismissed at every turn. But then, something unexpected happened. Andy, the CEO of the company, had been growing increasingly concerned about the office's performance. The branch, once a model of efficiency, had begun to slide into disarray under Joseph's reign. Productivity was down, morale was lower, and the numbers weren't improving. Something had to be done, and fast. Andy wasn't the type of leader to sit behind a desk and ignore problems. He was a hands-on kind of CEO, always with his finger on the pulse of the company. He began spending more time on the floor, quietly observing, listening, and taking note of the issues that were clearly brewing under Joseph's management. It didn't take long for him to realize that something was amiss. The energy of the office felt off, stifled, as though something crucial was being buried beneath the surface. He set up discreet surveillance to observe the office dynamics more closely. It was during one of these quiet observations that Andy saw it, Brooke. He'd noticed her before, of course, the janitor who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. But what he hadn't realized was that she wasn't just cleaning the office, she was observing the employees, reading between the lines of their conversations, making mental notes about their tasks and attitudes. There was something about the way she moved through the office, her eyes scanning documents, her hands brushing against papers, that suggested a deeper level of intelligence than her current position would imply. Andy's curiosity was piqued. He asked his assistant to pull up her file. What he discovered was unexpected. Brooke had an impressive educational background, a degree in business that she had earned before life had led her down this different path. It struck him like a bolt of lightning. Brooke wasn't just the janitor, she was the one responsible for the brilliant proposal that had been circulating among upper management. It was a plan that could pull the company out of its downward spiral, one that had been dismissed by Joseph as beneath him. The truth hit Andy hard. Joseph, who had been dictating the office's decline with his tyrannical leadership, had been utterly oblivious to the talent working right under his nose. It was time for a change. That afternoon, after watching another meeting where Joseph belittled employees and failed to listen to their ideas, Andy made his decision. He had seen enough. The next day, Andy called a company-wide meeting. He stood in front of the gathered employees, his gaze sweeping over the tired faces of his staff. They had been drained by Joseph's mismanagement, the toxic environment he had created, and the unrelenting demands placed upon them. The air was thick with anticipation, and as the room fell silent, and spoke. Effective immediately, Joseph is no longer with the company. A wave of shock rippled through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief. For many, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Joseph's leadership had been a nightmare, and now it was over. But there was more. "I've been watching," Andy continued, his voice steady, "and I've come to realize that there is someone here who has the vision to turn this company around." His eyes locked on Brooke, who stood near the back of the room, her hands clenched tightly in front of her as she stared at him, surprised by the attention. "Brooke," Andy said, his voice ringing out, "I've seen the proposal you've been working on. The one you wrote. I've read it, and I can tell you've got what it takes to lead this company in a new direction." Brooke's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected to be noticed, let alone praised. A soft gasp escaped her lips as she stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The room was silent, waiting for her response. But Brooke was a woman of few words. She didn't need to speak. Her actions, her work, had already proven her worth. And then, Andy turned to the rest of the staff. "I'm appointing Brooke as the new executive director. She'll take over immediately, and we'll work together to rebuild this company. The old ways are over." The room erupted into applause, though not everyone was pleased. Some employees exchanged wary glances. But for most, it was a moment of liberation. They had been waiting for someone to make things right. And now, Brooke, the woman they had often dismissed and overlooked, was their leader. Brooke felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Fear, relief, pride. But most of all, she felt a quiet, reassuring sense of purpose. For so long, she had fought to remain invisible, to keep her head down and avoid conflict. Now, everything had changed. She had been handed the reins, and it was up to her to steer this company toward a brighter future. Joseph, on the other hand, stood frozen, his face red with fury. He had been caught off guard, his pride shattered. As he was escorted out of the building, the employees watched in silence. No one felt sorry for him, not after everything he had put them through. Brooke took a deep breath and turned to face her new team. There would be many challenges ahead. Joseph had left the company in disarray, and there was a long road to recovery. But for the first time in years, Brooke felt hopeful. She was ready for the challenge. Her first day as executive director was a blur of meetings and decisions. She quickly implemented changes, smoothing over the tension between departments and pushing for new initiatives to revitalize the company. She didn't have all the answers, but she had something far more valuable: a willingness to listen, to learn, and to trust in the people around her. As the days passed, Brooke's transformation became more apparent. The office environment shifted. Employees began to feel seen and heard, their morale slowly rebuilding. The once depressed offices now buzzed with energy. The janitor had become the leader. And as for Brooke, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Her journey was far from over. There were still obstacles to overcome, and her past was never far from her mind. But for the first time in a long time, she felt truly alive, empowered, supported, and ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. As she closed her office door that evening, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Andy. "You're doing great. Let's keep building this together." Brooke smiled to herself. It had been a long road to get here, but for the first time, it felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. So if you love this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and comment below. Your interaction helps us grow.